Connie, for your very warm words and for your outstanding service as the European Commissioner for Climate and in the other positions you have held. I want to also acknowledge with gratitude David Miller, Director of International Diplomacy for the C40, who I knew when he was the mayor of Toronto. And I don't know who's here now and who's not, but I want to acknowledge Eric Garcetti, your incoming chair, who is a wonderful friend, and Hidalgo, your outgoing chair, who is also a wonderful friend, and Mike Bloomberg, who has done such wonderful work with this organization and many others. Steve Mills, you may not know, but he is with me here with the Climate Reality Project. And next month, November 20th, we're having a day-long 24 hours of reality. And as I said to some of the mayors that I met with and talked through some slides with earlier, any city who wants a slideshow on that day, I have personally trained 25,000 men and women who are expert on giving a presentation about the crisis, its solutions, and how to mobilize to implement these solutions. So, 10 minutes, huh? Should be enough to clear my throat. But actually at this point, there are only 3 questions that remain to be discussed where the climate crisis is concerned. Must we change? Can we change? Will we change? I'll present a little bit of evidence to support the answer to each one of those questions. Here's the spoiler alert. This crisis is way worse than almost anyone realizes. It is way worse. And it is getting worse still way more quickly than most people realize. You know, the scientists have done such an amazing job. They're so dedicated. They don't get paid for this. Thousands of them from around the world have just done an incredible job. They are culturally conservative. Not conservative in a political sense, though some of them are, some of them aren't, but when I say culturally conservative, here's what I mean. They don't want to put out a scientific finding until they're absolutely certain they have documented every part of it. And every question that could possibly be asked, they want to make sure they've exhausted every avenue toward an answer. And so sometimes when they will tell you privately, oh my gosh, this is just unfolding as a disaster, they will not put that in a scientific paper because they can't prove every aspect of it yet. The reason I'm telling you this is partly in an effort to explain why this crisis is so much worse than we, the general public, have generally understood. You know, we're treating the sky as an open sewer. We're putting 142 million tons of man-made heat-trapping global warming pollution into the sky every single day. It stays there on average roughly a century. It builds up over time. The accumulated amount, especially since the end of World War II with the global economy growing so much in the last 70 years, the accumulated amount of this heat-trapping pollution now traps as much extra heat as would be released by 500,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day in the lower atmosphere. An incredible amount of heat. And that's why the temperatures are going up. But in some ways, that's the least of it, because more than 90% of this extra heat's going into the ocean. And with apologies to Las Vegas, what happens in the ocean doesn't stay in the ocean. It comes back to the land where people mainly live. The majority of people who live in cities live near coasts, by the way, and the sea level rise is one of the second-order consequences. When the oceans warm up as much as we're warming them up, a couple things, well, more than a couple things, but a couple of things happen that are really important. Number one, the storms that come from the ocean to the land get much stronger. You saw perhaps what happened to our brothers and sisters in the Bahamas when Hurricane Dorian had wind speeds of up to 300 kilometers per hour for 40 hours at a stretch, just reducing part of that island nation to matchsticks. What a great tragedy. Now, only 2 years after essentially the same fate struck Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria. 3 weeks before that, Houston, Texas, in my country, had 1.5 meters of rain from Hurricane Harvey. And today, we have a super typhoon Hagibis, I believe is the way you pronounce it, aiming at Tokyo. World Rugby Cup games suspended. That's the least of it. So these ocean-based storms get much stronger. Second consequence of heating up the oceans as much as we're doing is that it disrupts the water cycle on which life depends. The evaporation off the oceans is what feeds the rain over the land, which rushes back to the sea through the rivers. But now we're increasing the amount of water vapor coming off the ocean so much with these extra temperatures. We get rain bombs with enormous amounts of rain falling in a very short period of time, creating floods and mudslides, and so many cities here have gone through this. You know, when I give my slideshow, when I started, I would look for examples of these phenomena that would go back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Now, I go to last week or yesterday, because they're getting worse and they're becoming more frequent. This extra heat's also melting the ice, and so the sea level is rising, and the tropical diseases are moving to the higher latitudes. Dengue fever has become, this year, a major health threat. The Lancet Commission says that the climate crisis is the global health emergency, and there are many reasons for it. It's generating climate refugees. Syria, before the civil war started, had the worst drought in the history of the Eastern Mediterranean, linked to climate. The scientists have pinned it down thoroughly. Other causes of that civil war, but the refugees that came out of Syria destabilized many political systems in Europe. Even Brexit, where the UK is about to shoot itself in both feet. It's pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. I'm not a UK citizen, but boy, I don't know why they don't have another referendum, because the people, you know, they realize now, a whole bunch of them, they're not going to vote for that again. But anyway, they were stampeded. Partly the guy who was the main force behind Brexit said the most powerful billboard was one that showed an endless line of refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, with the slogan, "The EU has failed us all." Political disruption. They're now predicting as many as 1 billion climate migrants in this century. My religious faith, my own faith tradition, teaches me to welcome the stranger. My previous career in politics taught me that there are sometimes thresholds beyond which a very large and sudden surge of immigration can trigger the release of populist passions. So I could go on with the list of consequences that illustrate the answer to that first question. Must we change? Yes, we have to change. This is our generation's life or death battle. Think back through the histories of the cities represented here and the nations they are found in, times in the past where heroism made the difference in a crucial battle that defined history. The whole world is facing just those circumstances right now. Is the generation of people alive today made up of moral cowards? Are we really so easily manipulated into lethargic complacency by an organized campaign by polluters purchased and paid for by the polluters who are the principal source of this global warming pollution, to pull the wool over our eyes, to deceive us, to cause us to disbelieve what we can see with our own eyes? I fully realize that in the world of governance, not to mention the world of politics, it is extremely difficult to point over the horizon and ask people to imagine the consequences of the choices we make today, for good or ill. It's difficult. Every mayor here, every close assistant and colleague of a mayor who's been through the Democratic battles and campaigns, you know this at least as well as I do, and most of you better. But there are times in human history where we as human beings have to rise above the limitations of our providence. We have inherited the behaviors and instincts of our ancient ancestors that survived certain kinds of threats. And we react instantly when one of those comes along. And we are vulnerable to greed, we're vulnerable to ego, we're vulnerable to all kinds of human weaknesses and failings. We all know that. We're human beings. But here's what we sometimes forget. We also have the ability, the God-given ability, to rise above those limitations when we see the necessity of doing so. This is such a time. And because so many national leaders have fallen prey to the very skillful and well-financed lobbying and campaign supporting and revolving door flowing special interests that manage in various ways to just seize control of policy. It's one of the reasons why inequality is rising to dangerous levels. Inequality is a little bit like inflation. You're always going to have a little. If you don't, you got another kind of problem. But you always want a little, but you have to avoid at all costs hyperinflation. Ruins everything. Inequality is the same way. Some inequality is a necessary condition for markets to work. People have different levels of skills, and some skills are valued more than others. But when inequality rises to the hyper inequality levels, that threatens both democracy and capitalism. And we're hearing that dialogue now. Too many of our national governments have fallen under the spell of wealthy special interests. Nice people. Very nice. They're trained to be, and they're chosen because they're inherently nice. And you know, the most of it's legal. That's the crime. But because so many of our national governments have fallen into this tar pit of special interest influence that keeps things just the way they are when they help those who have enough power to want them that way. I'm sounding a little radical. I'm not, really. I'm just an objective observer in my own mind. But because of what's happened to so many of our national governments, mayors are on the front line now. You don't have the luxury of just hanging out with, now there's some cities that the property developers are pretty influential. I get all that. Okay, but by and large, mayors are closer to the people. You don't have the luxury of just going away and reading reports about what's going on. You run into your constituents every single day. Maybe that's the reason why mayors have been providing such outstanding leadership. A lot of this is up to you. We need you. I'm not here just to give you a speech. I'm here to recruit you. We need your help. The world needs your help. The next generation needs your help. And the young people are saying in ever louder, more poignant, more persuasive, more passionate terms that they depend upon us to do the right thing. Okay, so second question is, can we change? Here's the good news. We have had an absolutely spectacular emergence of new technologies that don't pollute and can replace most of the heavily polluting technologies that have gotten us into this. 5 years ago, before the Paris Agreement, electricity produced by solar and wind was cheaper than electricity produced by new coal and gas plants in 1% of the world. 1%. 5 years later, today, electricity from solar and wind is cheaper than electricity from new fossil fuel plants in 2/3 of the world. 5 years from now, that will be true in 100% of the world. You know, we got used to hearing about how computer chips would come down in cost and keep going down, and mobile phones and, you know, flat screen TVs. That's happened with solar. That's happened with wind. It's happening with batteries. It's happening with electric vehicles. It's happening with efficiency improvements. And we're seeing a farmer-led regenerative agriculture revolution. We're seeing more than 200 major global companies have pledged to go to 100% renewable energy. And many global companies are now pushing the boundaries towards circular manufacturing. Forestry on a sustainable basis is more possible when the new satellites can follow every single individual tree. We're not there yet, but we have the tools that we need. Last year in Europe, if you look at all of the new electricity generation that was installed, how much of it do you think was solar and wind? 88%. 88%. In India, 65%. In China, 53%. In my country, in the US, 49%, almost zero coal. By the way, the famous coal museum in Kentucky has just installed solar panels on its roof in order to save money. True story. True story. Electric vehicles have increased 450% in numbers just in the last 4 years, and the drivetrain, the most important part of any car or truck, will drop definitively below the price of the internal combustion engine vehicle's drivetrain within 2 years. This is happening as well. Batteries. So we can do this. We have to do it. We can do it. And as we do it, we can create jobs. Let me tell you another quick story about my country. What's the fastest growing job in the United States of America? Solar installer. For the last 5 years, solar installation jobs have grown 6 times faster than average job growth. What's the second fastest growing job? Wind turbine technician. Can anybody think of an opportunity that exists in every single city represented here that could put millions of people to work in a program that would pay for itself? Retrofitting buildings. 25% of the global warming pollution can be traced to grossly inefficient residential, commercial, and industrial structures, and could be stopped with more insulation, better windows, LED lighting. Why don't we do that? Well, some of you know what's described as the agent principal problem, where one person pays for the building of a structure, and then another person pays the monthly energy bills. The incentives for the builder will be to scrimp on extra insulation or better windows because the bills are going to be paid by somebody else. That's not an impossible problem to solve. One city here, I can't remember, but they figured out how to crack this nut. They have had a 385% return on their investment. So here's what you do. You look forward, again, the problem of looking over the horizon, dealing with the reality we face now in terms of its future dimension. Same thing here. You look out 5 years and you see the sharp decline in energy bills. That's money. Those are real savings. All you need is a financial instrument to pull those savings from the future forward into the present and hire the people. And by the way, these jobs can't be outsourced. They're in the community. They're in your cities. There are many similar examples. So we can do this. Final question. Will we do it? Most important of all, I think we will. But honestly, that decision's going to be up to you. I'm encouraged by the global Green New Deal, and I congratulate the C40 organization for coming up with this inspiring initiative. And it connects the solutions to the climate crisis to dealing with inequality and dealing with environmental injustice and dealing with the need for a lot of good new jobs. So I am encouraged. So I need to close. I'm out of time. We're not out of time. We have barely enough time to solve this crisis. What does solving it mean? Some damage has been done. Regrettably, some of the damage that has been done is not recoverable. We have to be honest about that. Regrettably, there will be more damage before we turn the corner. But we still have the ability to prevent the civilization-ending catastrophic harm that the scientists have warned us about. And since the scientists were absolutely 100% right in what they warned us about 20 years ago and 10 years ago and 5 years ago, shouldn't that cause us to pay more attention now to what they're telling us will happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? We should listen to them. And we should listen to the inspiring young Greta Thunberg. What a wonderful, clear voice of conscience she is presenting to the world. I believe we will do it. But I will close by repeating what I said before. I really, if I had the ability to transfer from the feelings that I have in my heart to yours. I know it sounds corny. I just don't know how to do it. I try. Everything's at risk. And if we decide that this is the moment and we are the ones to solve this crisis, what joy there is in turning your hands to work that justifies pouring every bit of creativity and innovation that mayors are so great at, and energy to solve this crisis. And looking over the horizon one final time, it's not that hard to imagine 40 years from now, the generation that comes of age then, if they live in a dystopian world that is filled with the horrors the scientists are warning us about, if there are 1 billion climate refugees destabilizing governance, leading to a Mad Max kind of governance in some areas of the world, if cities are shut down with no drinking water in many geographies, if droughts are damaging the food supplies and the underground water supplies, if new diseases are ravaging populations, worst of all, if that generation feels despair instead of hope and looks at their own children and feels grief that their lives will be worse still, they would be fully justified in looking back at us in our time and asking, what in the hell were you thinking? How could you have failed to act? Didn't you hear the scientists? Didn't you watch the television news every night with the floods and droughts and all the rest? What were you thinking? Were you watching TV too much? What was it? On the other hand, if that generation finds themselves in a world that is animated by a spirit of renewal and hope and optimism, with all of the polluting activities being displaced by clean, new, efficient technologies that are creating millions of new jobs and filling them with hope, if the air is getting cleaner and air pollution is not as bad and the waters are being cleaned up and they feel hope in their hearts and they look at their children and think, thank God it's going to be better still when they grow up. I want them to look back at us and ask the question, how did you find the moral courage to rise up and say, we're going to do this? Part of the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is that political will is itself a renewable resource, and they will know that in Copenhagen, Denmark, in October of the year 2019, mayors from all over the world came together and decided to get moving and solve this crisis. Thank you very much.